Miami, with a long and illustrious history of college football, but a not so illustrious history within the ACC, has finally won the Coastal Division. We've been waiting for it for a number of years. Miami defeats Virginia Tech 28-10 in the Coastal Division showdown. We bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC. So if you love ACC football, if you love the ACC in general, college football, college sports, please join Mike on Inside the ACC. Mike, how you doing tonight?
Doing all right, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Like we were talking about before we started to record the instant analysis here, that 3:30 window was impossible to keep up with. This was probably the best slate of important games that we've had this season in college football, and this was just one of them, as the ACC pretty much decided what it's going to look like that first week in December with Clemson and Miami. So the Canes win at 28-10. Your initial thoughts about how they got it done?
Defense, I think, is the one major takeaway. Consistency on both sides of the football would be second, in my opinion. I've been a pretty staunch critic of Miami this year, leading into this weekend. Not because the talent wasn't there. I think I've said multiple times, the talent is there for the Hurricanes. MarkRogersTV has done an excellent job throughout the first 2 years there with the Hurricanes recruiting. Not that Al Golden didn't. I mean, Al Golden did a fine job recruiting, and they've always been able to recruit at Miami, but MarkRogersTV brings a certain aura about him, and you could say what you want about him not being able to win big games in the past, but Georgia was always competitive in the SEC, so you knew once Miami made the move to hire MarkRogersTV and MarkRogersTV went back to his alma mater, you knew that the Hurricanes were going to be in good hands, and they were just kind of squeaking by early this season. You know what I mean? They were in position to win a lot of games pretty handily, and they kept shooting themselves in the foot and not winning games as soundly and as convincingly as they should have. And I think that was the one major criticism about Miami heading into this game against Virginia Tech on Saturday night. And this is the first big game of the year for Miami. Looking at the schedule, I think a lot of people would have pointed initially to the Florida State game, and then Florida State, hasn't turned out to be nearly as good as, most expected them to be this year. They're sitting at 3-5 after a victory today against Syracuse. So this was Miami's biggest game of the year so far. And I thought Miami played an excellent game on both sides of the football. It was their most complete game of the season, by far, their most consistent game of the year. It was interesting because I thought, the running game without Mark Walton this year has been a roller coaster ride ever since he's, been injured. Travis Homer's done an okay job. Some ups, some downs. And tonight he broke a couple of huge runs that ended up being the difference in the football game. Obviously, the long touchdown run in the second quarter to make it 14-0 Miami. I thought that was a huge moment in the game. But what you've seen with Virginia Tech is, they struggled to tackle tonight, which I thought was a major problem and one of the major sticking points for them in the football game. One of the keys I thought to the game was getting Miami into third down situations, because the Hurricanes rank 118th in the country out of 130 teams in third down offense. So they haven't been converting a lot on third down. So in Miami's eyes, how do you beat that? Well, you just never get into third down situations. Miami, I think, got into like 6 or 7 of them total in the game. At least it was 6 or 7 through like 3.5 quarters when the game actually mattered. And Miami had converted on 3 or 4 of those. So, they were at 50% or above. I'm not sure what they ended up finishing with, Mark, but
3 for 8.
3 for 8. Okay. So a couple of inconsequential third down stops there by the Hokies late in the game. But Miami was not in a lot of major third down situations tonight in this football game. And I think that's what ended up being the difference in the game. They were able to move the sticks and stay in front of the sticks, more importantly. And I thought that was huge. Virginia Tech didn't tackle well all night. Miami's playmakers on the outside did an excellent job. Malik Rozier, a lot of criticism with him. He threw 3 interceptions tonight, but he made a lot of pivotal plays in the football game. And that's really been the story of his season. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, but he seems to make the big plays when Miami needs him to. He obviously had that touchdown run to really put things out of reach in this football game in the fourth quarter, making it 28-10 Miami. That I thought that was a huge touchdown, obviously, because it really just sealed up the game for the Hurricanes. But on the Virginia Tech side, I know I'm rambling a little bit all over the place, but just, initial thoughts with Virginia Tech. I mean, offensively, I thought the play calling was extremely conservative. I thought Miami's defense was swarming, and they were a major reason for why Virginia Tech didn't perform as well on offense as they would have liked. But I thought Virginia Tech hit a couple of nice runs early in the game, and they kind of went away from that and got conservative, tried to run laterally, rather than right up the middle and north and south on this Miami defense, which is actually where the Hokies were having success early in the game. So I was a little bit surprised they went away from that. And then secondly, I think the offensive play calling this year has been a little bit conservative just because they know Josh Jackson's a redshirt freshman. But I think at this point in the year, you kind of know what you got at quarterback, and he made a lot of plays kind of off schedule tonight and, improvising. I think that's kind of where Josh Jackson's at his best. And I was surprised the Hokies didn't really let him loose a little bit more. I thought when the Hokies were successful on offense in this game on Saturday night, I thought it was when Josh Jackson was able to have a little bit more freedom with the play calling, a little run pass option action, or, the rollout plays where he has the option to tuck it and run. I thought that was Virginia Tech's best offense all night, and I don't think they went to that nearly enough in the football game. But credit to Miami on defense. They forced a bunch of turnovers tonight. I think it was 6 turnovers they finished with. So they did an excellent job there. Virginia Tech got stopped a couple times on 4th down in pivotal moments, 4th and 2, 4th and 3. Miami came up big with stops there as well. So, really it was Virginia Tech's inability to take advantage of the mistakes that they forced on defense. They turned Malik Rozier over a couple times. One before half I thought was huge. They intercept the pass, they run it back near midfield, and then the Hokies get inside the 25-yard line, and then they fumble. I thought that was a huge play in the game because the Hokies could have made it 14-10 before half. And then a couple times in the second half, they get stopped on 4th down, which ended up being pivotal. So credit to Miami at the end of the day. Defense was fantastic. Offense, they hit enough big plays, and that's really what Miami's offense has been this year. You're not going to get a lot of long, consistent drives. What you're going to get with Miami is massive chunk plays, and I thought those plays tonight ended up being the difference. Long passing plays, the Travis Homer touchdown run in the second quarter. Those types of big plays killed the Hokies defense tonight. You've got to credit Miami for making the plays they needed to and just being more athletic on the outside and making the plays they needed to win the football game.
Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC joining us to talk Miami, Virginia Tech. Canes win at 28-10. They will move on to the ACC championship game against Clemson. I believe that's completely sewn up at this point. Miami needed, basically to win this game, and a Georgia Tech loss. And the Yellow Jackets were down to by Virginia, surprisingly, I believe 40-36. So exactly what you talked about off the top. I was scrambling around looking for 3rd down statistics, and they just didn't matter, coupled with the inefficiency of Miami coming into this game on 3rd down. Mike, as you well know, Virginia Tech's defense, 3rd nationally, number 3 in the nation in 3rd down efficiency. But Miami's so explosive that they didn't get to 3rd down when it mattered. And Miami, if you rated and charted each play for its offense for the entire game, you wouldn't be extremely impressed. But when you make explosive plays, offensive consistency, as long as you hang on to the football, and in this case, not necessarily even hanging on to the football mattered. Travis Homer, yes, with a big burst in amongst his 14 carries for 95 yards for the Canes. In watching these two football teams play, and Virginia Tech is extremely talented. They recruit well. They bring in top 25 recruiting classes. It just looked like, especially on defense, that Miami just has more explosive players. Jaquan Jackson is an exceptional player. That guy's all over the place. He had a phenomenal interception in this game. RJ McIntosh, I don't know what the stats will tell us and when ACC Defensive Player of the Year is voted on, but he might be the most dominant defensive player. And that's saying a lot with a bunch in Clemson that RJ McIntosh has had an exceptional year for Miami game in, game out. And he did it again tonight. Had the one fumble recovery after the huge hit inside the red zone. I forget who made that pop, but it was on Cam Phillips, I believe, inside the 10-yard line, and McIntosh took it back the other way for a big gain. Another turnover inside, as you had mentioned, that Virginia Tech had at that point. Amon Richards has been off his game. He was hobbled with injury issues early. He's had the last couple of games, he hasn't looked quite himself, a lot of dropped passes. He made some big plays in the game. Miami just looking like a team that has the potential to play with just about anyone in the country. They're still going to have to eliminate some mistakes. They can't throw 3 interceptions against a Clemson in the ACC championship game or against most likely Notre Dame next week. What a game that will be. For the Hokies, Mike, your thoughts about what you saw tonight? Again, we have to measure these teams because they're so dominant and so much better than the other teams in the Coastal most of the time, that it's the big games. It's the West Virginia game, week 1. It's the Clemson game for Virginia Tech. And now it's Miami, to where you can clearly evaluate these teams. I guess for me, Josh Jackson hasn't developed as well as a passer that I had expected. I saw him missing the same throws in this game that I saw him miss in week 1 against West Virginia. There were a few plays in which he was taken off his platform and he rolled around and he had guys open, and he sailed the ball a few times, and that really cost them.
Yeah. It's really tough to gauge Virginia Tech. I mean, you look at this a little top to bottom. Let's look at the schedule. So you beat West Virginia in an emotional game in the opener, comes down to the wire. West Virginia is obviously a very good football team in the Big 12. So that's a pretty good win in the opener. You look at the rest of the schedule. I mean, it was a lot of cupcake games. You played Old Dominion, you played Delaware, East Carolina, who's atrocious on defense. You score something like 55 or 56 unanswered in that football game. You have all these little tune-up games, and then you play Clemson, and you don't look great. And then you win a game against BC, you beat Duke, you beat North Carolina, you beat teams you should beat, and you lose to teams that you should lose to. I mean, I think that's the accurate assessment of Virginia Tech right now. I think the one thing that's probably most disheartening for Virginia Tech fans is that this is the second major game this year on a national stage in prime time that they've just completely laid an egg.
Especially offensively.
Especially offensively. And there's only so much the defense can do. I mean, all the talk, I feel like, on the national scale, and rightfully so, is about Bud Foster and the defense. Everybody talks about a Bud Foster defense when they have a good game, but when they have a bad game, is it still the Bud Foster defense? I mean, I think tonight they had they forced turnovers, but it was a pretty so-so game by the Virginia Tech defense tonight. Tackling was a major issue, like I mentioned. Couldn't wrap up all night, and ultimately that's on the coaching staff. You have to have your players prepared to go up against these top athletes in the ACC. And let's face it, Miami's got some of the top athletes in the conference, and you've got to be able to wrap up against those teams as well as you do against a team like Duke or North Carolina, or even your out-of-conference opponents that you play, East Carolina, ODU, Delaware. I mean, it's easy for your defense to look great against lesser competition, but when you face a step up, or you take a step up in competition, you've got to be able to tackle, and Virginia Tech didn't do that tonight. And, I think the offense, to your point, has really struggled this year without the major playmakers that they had from a year ago. Or in years past, you had Bucky Hodges, you had Isaiah Ford, you had Sam Rogers, who was really missed, especially in pass protection. You really miss him. He was a solid running back, of course, in the senior year as well. He ran the ball extremely well last year for the Hokies. So you miss those guys on the offensive side of the ball. The Hokies are so young on offense that it's really difficult when they go up against an experienced defense. And that's what Miami is at this point. They got kids that are now sophomores and juniors who have grown together, much like the Virginia Tech defense has, and they're playing great football. And I think when you go up against those types of defenses, experience helps, and the Hokies just don't have that experience yet. Josh Jackson, while he's been good this year, and he's been as good as you can ask a redshirt freshman to be, he's been one of the most efficient passers in the country. But to your point, Mark, especially when he rolls out, he misses some throws. He threw a couple behind some receivers tonight that were ultimately picked off, and then he had a few throws that could have easily been intercepted. Just he was rolling out and threw a little bit behind his receiver, or he sailed the ball high. So Jackson's not there yet. He's been fantastic this year. He's done everything that you'd ask a redshirt freshman to do. But I think he's at his best when he's, kind of freewheeling and he has the ability to get outside the pocket and make some plays with his feet. I don't think Brad Cornelson did him many favors tonight with the play calling, but ultimately this was a great defensive performance by Miami, and I think that's what it boils down to. And the Hokies have faced two top defenses this year now, in Miami and Clemson, and it's really been much ado about nothing on the offensive side of the football. So it'll be interesting to see where the Hokies go from here. I mean, obviously they have a game against Georgia Tech next weekend. I don't care what you say about Georgia Tech's loss to Virginia today. Georgia Tech's got a solid football team. You got some winnable games down the stretch. You got Pitt, UVA. So, the Hokies will have winnable games here as they move here throughout the final month of the regular season. But, a 10-2 season isn't the worst thing in the world if that's what it ends up being for the Hokies. And even a 9-3 year with an offense that was extremely inexperienced, I think you'll take it if you're a Hokies fan. But I think you realize when you play teams like this on national TV in prime time, the Tech is just not there yet. And it is year 2 under Justin Fuente. No time to panic, but this is a rebuild that's well ahead of schedule, but it is a rebuild nonetheless. And I think you realize that, he kind of inherited a 6-6 team, a 7-6 team when he came in now about a year and a half ago. And it's going to take a while before the Hokies are able to compete and really go toe-to-toe with some of the best teams in the ACC.
Miami marches on to the ACC championship game. They defeat Virginia Tech 28-10. Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC. Please join him right there for the very best in ACC football coverage and overall sports throughout the year. The one thing I'll hit on with Virginia Tech and would like to get your take before maybe we give Miami a quick snapshot of their game coming up with Notre Dame and a quick early preview would be, I'm in an interesting place with these discussions, Mike, as you well know, because I'm covering the landscape, top to bottom, coast to coast. So I check in with you on a regular basis, and we really grind through the personnel, especially in the off season. So I see a ton of names, and I see a ton of guys on the field that I think, okay, Mike and I have talked about these guys. I'm seeing them for the first time. Or in a case like a Virginia Tech, a top 15 to 25 kind of program, I'm typically watching 3 games a season start to finish. And then I'll see extended highlights elsewhere. And I'm seeing names, especially on the receiving core, that I'm thinking, Cam Phillips, get this guy some help. Who's the number 2 guy? Who's the number 3 guy? I see guys like there was one drive in particular, Mike. Virginia Tech still in the game. It's 21-10. Sure, they've got to hurry. They got to do some things, but there's like 10 minutes left. And James Clark, I know he transferred in from Ohio State. He drops a pass. He may have dropped 2 passes. Hezekiah Grimsley dropped a pass in which both of those were 3rd and long plays, or I think one was 2nd and long, then it was 3rd and long. Either one of would have extended the drive for big plays for 20, 22-yard gains. Both were drops. And the receiving core just doesn't look like there's anybody there to help out Josh Jackson or supplement and complement Cam Phillips' contribution. 7 catches for 101 tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a major issue all year. It's actually been a major issue for a couple of years. Last year you have Isaiah Ford and Cam Phillips, and you have Bucky Hodges. But I think the major question everybody was asking, because it was pretty clear Isaiah Ford, Bucky Hodges, one of them, maybe both, and ended up being both, of course, would go to the NFL. So who was it going to be that was going to step up into a bigger role alongside Cam Phillips? And we're still trying to figure that out. Sean Savoy is obviously he's the most obvious name. I mean, he's played really well all year. He's been a weapon out of the slot. They've moved him all over the field. He's been used prominently in the jet sweep game, which is a major staple of the Justin Fuente, Brad Cornelison offense. He's been the second guy, but outside of Phillips and Savoy, it's really been just a plethora of inexperienced receivers who have been playing, 50 to 60% of the time. I mean, they haven't gotten a ton of reps on the offensive side of the ball, and they really haven't been able to make an impact or a major impact when they've been in the game. Eric Kuma's a name, Hezekiah Grimsley, as you mentioned, James Clark, the grad transfer from Ohio State. But they've, a couple of those guys, especially Kuma and James Clark, they've battled injuries. CJ Carroll was a name out of the slot. He's been a guy who's been really reliable there for the Hokies, but he's been out with a foot issue basically since the Clemson game. So he's been out of the lineup for a month, didn't play again tonight. The Hokies really miss him in the slot. He's a guy that plays a little bit of that Hezekiah Grimsley role, and he would have caught a lot of those passes tonight that Grimsley dropped and that James Clark dropped as well. Carroll is one of those sure-handed receivers. I liken him to a poor man's Hunter Renfrow in the slot, a guy that's extremely extremely reliable, isn't going to make a ton of plays after the catch. But he's a guy who's absolutely a possession receiver. The Hokies definitely miss. But yeah, that's the major question for the Hokies offense moving forward as they continue to try to figure things out. They're extremely young on that side of the football, but who are the younger receivers going to be that emerge? Obviously, Cam Phillips is a senior. He's going to move on to the NFL. Who are you going to have to replace him? Savoy will likely take over as the number one receiver. He's got a load of talent and tons of potential as he moves through to his sophomore or junior, senior year, however long he stays. But who are those next crop of guys that are going to come in and be major contributors on a consistent basis? I think consistency is the most important thing when you look down the depth chart to the second, third, fourth receivers in the Virginia Tech offense. So yeah, Josh Jackson needs some help. And this is something that's going to continue to haunt the Hokies. They got to figure it out this year, quite frankly, because as soon as Cam Phillips leaves, I don't know who he's going to throw to outside of Savoy. So that's where the Hokies are at this point. They got to figure things out in a hurry.
Miami defeats Virginia Tech 28-10. We're on the line with Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC. You got to join him right there for the very best in ACC football coverage. They cover all sports, but of course, we're talking football 24/7, 365 here on Mark Rogers TV, and Mike's one of our main contributors, so please join him on Inside the ACC. Mike sees a lot of Notre Dame football. I've seen the Irish play Georgia this year. That, of course, now a team that's considered one of the 2 or 3 best in the nation, and that was a 20-19 game before Brandon Wimbush has matured and developed as a passer. So he provides much more of a threat right now as a passer than he did at that stage of the season. That was only week 2 or 3. Notre Dame rushes the ball as well as anyone in the nation. Josh Adams has to be considered a possible Heisman front runner along with Baker Mayfield, considering the plight of J.T. Barrett and Saquon Barkley today in losses in the Big Ten as Penn State and Ohio State were upset. Miami, Notre Dame, and the Irish, they were a joke on defense last year. They are taking the football away from teams just like much like Miami with 16 or 17 takeaways this season. Notre Dame getting it done in the weight room during the offseason. Much was made, if you look into Notre Dame football, about getting stronger, faster, more explosive on defense. They're a much tougher defense. They're not missing tackles. They're not blowing coverages. They're playing as well as anyone in the nation. Just ask the likes of NC State that we saw take Clemson to the final drive. They did not hang in the game at South Bend. So make that comparison. NC State at Clemson puts points on the board, plays very well, takes the game down to the last 15 or 20 seconds of the game. Last week at Notre Dame, when they were fresher, got blown out. Notre Dame is for real. I think they've proven it to this point. USC, they've got their issues, but they're one of the most talented rosters in the nation. Notre Dame blew them out 49-14. Want to make one note before I turn it over to you, Mike, about Notre Dame and Miami. Christopher Herndon, exploding on the scene as one of the best playmakers at his position in college football. Only had 2 receptions tonight, but again, much like a microcosm of the entire Miami offense, he's not going to show up with 8 or 10 catches, but he's going to make 2 explosive plays that are going to make a difference. He may have saved the North Carolina game with a busted play in which he broke 2 tackles down the middle and made a huge play in the second half in that game. Did much the same in this one against Virginia Tech. So Miami, Notre Dame, much like the old days, this should be a great one and is extremely important on the national scene.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Real quick to your point about Chris Herndon, kid's for real. Like, he took that one short pass to the house, and that really changed the entire complexion of the game. And that's really when Miami started to pull away. Of course, the Rozier rushing touchdown ended up sealing it a little bit later on in the game. But yeah, huge play by Herndon, and he's been a godsend for the Miami offense, especially the last couple of weeks with that play you mentioned against North Carolina as well. So Herndon's emerged as a big-time playmaker for the Hurricanes. To the game next week, yeah, this is going to be a showdown. I mean, if this same Miami team shows up, ND is going to be in for a dogfight. This is a Hurricanes team that, as I mentioned, I've been extremely critical of because of their consistency. Now, this is their biggest win of the year against Virginia Tech tonight. Can they take the momentum and move forward and avoid the letdown spot? They're going to be at home again. It's going to be a primetime game at 8 o'clock, and College Game Day just announced this evening that they'll be down there in Coral Gables for the game. So as if Miami didn't have enough distractions. Oh, and the new college football rankings come out on Tuesday night. So as if Miami fans and players didn't already have huge egos and, huge heads, they're going to have their egos explode after the new rankings, how well they performed in prime time, and they also have another major game this week against Notre Dame. But, on to more pressing matters. I think the Hurricanes rushing defense needs to show up, obviously, against a team like Notre Dame. Virginia Tech is not nearly as proficient in the run as they are in the passing game. I think the one weakness with the Hurricanes defensively, if you're going to nitpick and find one, I guess it would be their rushing defense. Virginia Tech wasn't good enough to exploit that this evening, but I think Notre Dame obviously can. Josh Adams left the game today against Wake Forest for Notre Dame. Obviously, he's a Heisman candidate running back. He was evaluated for a concussion. He'll be looked at throughout the week. I think Adams was held out today more as a precaution there. Left the game, I believe, late first, early second quarter. Brandon Wimbush got a little banged up as well. Had a long run late in the first half. He ended up taking a pretty good shot to his left hand that swelled up on him, but he stayed in the game. So he looks like he's going to be okay. And, x-rays were negative there. So he avoided any major damage. So Notre Dame's a little bit banged up offensively. Their two most important players. But, assuming that Wimbush will obviously be playing next week and assuming Adams is going to be full go, Miami's got their hands full against a very aggressive front that Notre Dame has. Notre Dame's offensive line, I believe, is one of the 2 or 3 best offensive lines in all of college football. Miami has not faced an offensive line this year anywhere near the level that Notre Dame's is. So we can talk about Miami's front seven and how good they've been. The secondary's been okay for the Hurricanes as well, but it's going to come down to the battle in the trenches. And I think Miami's really going to have to buckle down and be ready to go next Saturday night, because this is a Notre Dame offensive line that really takes pride in the game and really likes to get after it, create holes in the running game. They've been pass protecting a whole lot better than they were earlier in the year. Brandon Wimbush, he's looked pretty good. I know he's only completing a little bit over 50% of his passes, but his pocket presence is worlds better than it was against, say, a team like Georgia in the second game of the year. Georgia really got after Notre Dame, and Brandon Wimbush was having so much trouble throwing the football that they couldn't really exploit some holes in the defense in that football game, in the secondary specifically. Notre Dame's got an excellent defense, one of the best defenses in all of college football. It's a complete 180 from a year ago when they were one of the worst defenses in college football. Mike Elko came over from Wake Forest. He's completely turned the defense around as the new defensive coordinator under Brian Kelly. Malik Rozier is going to have to take care of the football next week. That's the one thing I worry about. Notre Dame doesn't turn the ball over a ton, and that's something that I actually keyed on tonight in the Virginia Tech game. The Hokies had done a pretty good job this year taking care of the football, but, Miami was able to force more turnovers. Looking at Notre Dame, they don't make nearly the mistakes that even Virginia Tech makes. I mean, Notre Dame really takes care of the football as well. That doesn't mean Miami can't force turnovers, but, I think if the Irish take care of the football and are able to force turnovers on the defensive side, it's going to be a tough game for Miami to win, even at home. We've mentioned that Notre Dame is legit. I think Miami's best path to victory in this game is obviously stopping the run and making Brandon Wimbush throw the football and hope you turn him over a couple times. But, if the Hurricanes play like they did tonight, they should be right in this football game next Saturday, because I've said it for the last few weeks. I've said, even though Miami's playing inconsistent football, there are very few teams in the country that can match up with all the athletes they have if they put together a 4-quarter game. I think Notre Dame's one of those teams that can match up with Miami, so it should be a fantastic game, assuming the Hurricanes come out and play much like they did this weekend. But if they lay an egg and they mess around and they turn the ball over a few times and they're sloppy on offense, penalties have still been an issue for the Hurricanes. They had a few tonight. They were just absolutely killer. If Miami cleans that up, they're going to have an excellent opportunity next Saturday at home. But if they mess around, turn the ball over, are inconsistent on offense and on defense, Notre Dame's going to go into Coral Gables and they'll blow out Miami. So we'll have to see how it goes. I anticipate Miami will be ready to go. Mark Richt Obviously played at Miami. He's a guy who's very familiar with the rivalry from back in the day, so he's going to have his guys ready to go. It's the old Catholics versus convicts. It's the first game that Notre Dame and Miami has had in a really, really long time that's been relevant on the national scale, and I'm really excited to see how both teams play next Saturday night.
Yeah, and interesting from the standpoint of we can compare matchups because Notre Dame plays so many games against the ACC. Another one today against Wake Forest. Of course, Miami with, at this point, I believe 6 games played against the conference. We saw a Wake Forest team that's I would never sell as a great team, but they're 5-4. They stand up against just about anyone in the ACC, most notably Clemson. They only lost that game 28-14, acquitted themselves well. Again, nothing close to Miami talent, but Notre Dame blew out Wake Forest. Forget the 48-37 score. As Mike mentions, no Wimbush late in the game as he was taken out for precautionary reasons. Josh Adams, their Heisman Trophy candidate at running back, also only 5 carries for 22 yards with a concussion. Hopefully he will be back next week in Miami. So Notre Dame blows out NC State last week. They blow out USC. They've been extremely impressive. We see what Boston College has done the last few weeks, and I'm not going to sell anyone that BC was as good in week 3 or 4 when they played Notre Dame as they're playing right now. But BC, who's done what they've done in the last few weeks and taking out the likes of Virginia and Louisville, was completely annihilated by Notre Dame 49-10 when they ran for 515 yards in that game. To Mike's point, Brandon Wimbush is not going to hit you for like a 28 for 35 day. Notre Dame wants to keep him around 20 attempts. He's probably going to complete 12 of those, but they're going to be downfield. They're going to be chunk plays. They're going to be big throws to big athletic receivers led by St. Equanimous Brown. Or Equanimous St. Brown. I kind of switched him around there. Yes, they have a tremendous slew of talent. Notre Dame, they always recruit in the top 10 and just were able to put it together. And Mike, just let you know what's happened on the defensive side of the ball in regards to coaching and being able to take care of business after a shoddy performance in 2016. I've got a number of Notre Dame insiders that I talk to on a regular basis that talk about strength and conditioning being a big emphasis and huge difference on this football team, and especially on defense this season. So, yeah, Notre Dame, Miami, that's a must-see. Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC. Again, I can't tell you enough that you need to join him right there. Check out the site for ACC football coverage. As you can tell, as Mike discusses, not only Miami and Virginia Tech, but the entire ACC, that he tracks the conference as much as anybody out there. If you have yet to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please do. You will see right there tons of coverage of Miami and Virginia Tech in particular, and the entire ACC as well. Mike, anything else before we say goodbye?
Please, please, please check us out, InsideTheACC.com. We have it loaded with great articles, great content. Mark, we post a million videos with you, of course, that I do on a regular basis, and a few others from the site as well. A lot of great content coming out. Basketball season's coming up, of course. A lot of people are into that. So I know you got a lot of college football fans on here, obviously, but some people follow basketball as well. So please follow the site for all of that information. And we're coming to the most exciting time of the year for college football, and we got a ton of content coming out as well. So check us out over at InsideTheACC.com. Of course, Mark, stay with Mark Rogers and his YouTube channel, please. Like we do a bunch of stuff, but we're only scratching the surface with the ACC. You got a million people you talk to, so please.
Okay, Mike. We always
check out all the content.
Yep. It's always a great discussion, man.
Yep, absolutely.
See you soon.